the great promises of the Bible. It's one of the foundational promises of the Jewish people, that God would bless Abraham, bless a line of people, and not only bless them, but bless the whole world. That last line, that all the earth will be blessed through your seed, is what it says. And it's an incredible promise. One of the things that we notice if you read the Bible, if you've read the Bible all the way through, is that you hit certain points where there are long lists of Bob was the father of John, and John was the father of, so and it just goes on and on. The father of the son, the father, all the way down the long list. And it could get kind of monotonous if you've ever hit those passages. For example, you come to Chronicles, First Chronicles, and I think, if I recall, the first 9 chapters are nothing but a genealogy of so-and-so was the father of so-and-so was the father of so-and-so was the father of so-and-so, and he had a cousin who was the father of so-and-so, the father of so-and-so, and it just went on and on. And you think, why are they doing this? But to the Jewish people, those lines, those family lines, were a visible expression and description of the passage you just heard from Theodora. That's theoretical. It's a promise that doesn't have any flesh. It's intangible. It's a promise that God is going to one day bless a seed. And you remember the promises that were given when we did the story and walked through the whole Bible. And remember that the promises where God took Abraham out. He said, Abraham, look at the stars. And you see how many, if you can count them, that's how many descendants you're going to have. And as if that didn't work, he said, think about the sand on the beach. And all the grains of sand, that's how many descendants you're going to have. And so this idea of genealogies that the Jewish people did in Chronicles and other places, it was a sign of just giving names to that promise. You could say this was the father of so-and-so, who was the father of so-and-so, the father of so-and-so. And see, it's actually manifesting in front of our eyes. The concrete promises of God are unfolding, and that's why they love them. But it was also because in those concrete promises manifesting that they could see that the promises were real and that God was present among them and was doing a beautiful work. So today, as we come to the Christmas readings, we're going to do something that I've only done once or twice, and that's to start at the very beginning of the Gospel of Matthew and to go through a genealogy in the Gospel of Matthew. Now, this passage isn't very often used for Advent or Christmas. It's probably not the most exciting at first glance of passages, but it's filled with wonderful treasures that are not obvious at first glance, but are nevertheless there. One of my mentors says that this passage is easily passed over and neglected as something that there's nothing there. But it is filled with surprises that call for delightful rumination over its pages. And I invite you to hear this passage of Scripture and to ruminate, to ponder, and to look for the surprises, listen for the surprises. This is the very beginning of the Gospel of Matthew, and it goes this way. The book of the Genesis, the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac was the father of Jacob. Jacob was the father of Judah and all his brothers. Judah was the father of Perez and Hazor. And Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Aminadab. Aminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon was the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth. And Obed was the father of Jesse. And Jesse was the father of David, the king. And after David, he was father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. And Solomon, the father of Rehoboam. And Rehoboam was the father of Abijah. And Abijah was the father of Asaph. And Asaph was the father of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat was the father of Joram, and Joram was the father of Uzziah. Uzziah was the father of Jotham. Jotham was the father of Ahaz. Ahaz was the father of Hezekiah, and Hezekiah was the father of Manasseh. Manasseh was the father of Amos. Amos was the father of Josiah. Josiah was the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the deportation to Babylon. After the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel. Shealtiel was the father of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was the father of Abiud. Abiud was the father of Eliakim. Eliakim was the father of Azor. Azor was the father of Zadok. Zadok was the father of Achim. Achim was the father of Elihud. Elihud was the father of Eleazar. Eleazar was the father of Mathan. Mathan was the father of Jacob. Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, to whom Jesus was born, the one who is called the Christ. This is the word of the Lord. Amen. Thanks be to God. It's not something you'd probably pick up for your Christmas reading. It's not something you'd put on your Christmas card. It's a little hard to see what's the point. But there's some real treasures in this. It's set into 3 different blocks. But before we get to those, let's look at the very first line. And it says this. In the very beginning, it says, the book of genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David. And the Greek up above, those first 2 words, it's fun that it takes half as many words as it does in English to say the same thing. But those first 2 words in Greek are biblos genesias. It's literally the book of Genesis, the book of Genesis of Jesus Christ. Now, you remember that the book of Genesis is the first book of the Bible. But the word Genesis, that's a Latin name that was taken out of this Greek word. The real name for the Old Testament book we call Genesis is in Hebrew called Beroshith, which means at the head of or in the beginning. Beroshith. But anybody reading this, Matthew's gospel, this Greek word would think of Genesis. They would think of the story of God creating the whole earth. Out of nothing, he created the earth. And when it says the book, literally, the book of Genesis of Jesus Christ, the book of the Genesis of Jesus, it's talking about, it's calling forth a remembrance of that ancient Old Testament book, and it's calling forth the people of God to remember or reflect on the idea that God is recreating. Where he at one point in time created everything fresh and new, he is now taking that broken and hurting world and creating again, recreating it. And the Gospel of Mark starts in a similar way. It uses the same word, Genesias, it says, but it's slightly different. Instead of the book of Genesis, it says the beginning, the Genesis of the gospel of Jesus Christ begins this way. And it talks about John the Baptist. But it's, again, Mark's way of saying, if you thought creation was good, watch what God does recreating a broken and fallen world. Watch the recreation. And then it hits the list, the different things as we roll through. And one other thing before we get to that, there's the 3 different crucial words in this. The genealogy of Jesus Christ. Christ means Messiah. It means the anointed one, the one that's set apart by God for a holy purpose, that God is going to use him in a unique and powerful way. This person is David's son, the king, the son of the king, and this is fulfilling one of the greatest promises and hopes of Israel, that Nathan the prophet told David that you are going to have a son, and he's going to sit on your throne. He'll sit on your throne forever, and his kingdom will never end. And it was an incredible promise. And David, when he heard it, he fell on his knees and said, God, who am I that would deserve such a gift as this? But this is the greatest hope of Israel, that God would answer this problem and give them a king in space and time, that God would answer this promise and fulfill it in space and time. And the son of David points to this great king of Israel, and the son of Abraham points broader than that. Abraham is the world's great hope. Where David was Israel's great hope of a king, Abraham's the promise that you heard from Theodora. At the very end of that, it says, through you, Abraham, all the nations of the world will be blessed. Jesus, the promise and fulfillment of Jesus is the fulfillment of God's promise that not only is Israel going to have the king they've been longing for all these years, that the people of the world will have the call and the hope fulfilled, that they too are welcome into this. Well, now we come to the genealogy, and And we're only going to look at this first part, but before we get there, it splits into 3 equal sections, equal length of 14 people, 14 generations. The first goes from Abraham to King David, the next from King David to the deportation of Babylon, the third goes from the Babylon deportation to the birth of Jesus. And each of these is filled with surprises. The first one has 4 surprising women. The second block has 4 surprising alterations. And the third block has 2/5, you could say. It has a 5th woman and a 5th alteration, both surprising. And we don't have time to look at those other blocks, the alterations or the 2/5 and the later thing, but to look at this and to see the surprise of 4 women in this. Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and the wife of Uriah. 4 women. Now, the early church caught on that the reason that these are here, they said, was that it helped to see God's great love for us by putting sinful people into the genealogy. And they were pretty hard on the women, as they were the sinful ones, as if the men weren't. And the reality in the second block especially, there are a whole lot of terrible kings. And arguably, it was not the wife of Uriah that was the problem, but David. And it was really a story we look at as far more complex. But it is a wonderful story of normal, broken, hurting, messed up people are in the lineage of Jesus. Male and female, broken, messed up, hurting people, God has put into the lineage of Jesus. Now, to begin with the first, Tamar. Way back, there's a rule in Judaism that if a man and woman were married and the husband died, if he had a brother, the brother was to marry this wife and raise up children in the name and lineage of the dead brother. So you have Judah, and he has 2 sons, and he gives one to Tamar, and because he was a wicked man, he died. So Judah took his second son and gave him to Tamar, which is according to the law and the rules, and because the second son didn't want to do this and violated God's law and command, he died. So Tamar says, give me your 3rd son, who is pretty young at that stage, but he says, give me your 3rd son. And Judah, having lost 2 sons and beginning to suspect that maybe she was the reason, didn't want to give his 3rd son. So what she did is dressed up like a prostitute, seduced him, became pregnant by Judah, and gave birth to these 2 sons, twins. Now, in a sense, what she did was not right, but in another sense, it was fulfilling exactly what the law prescribed, exactly what Judah should have done. And in fact, Judah says, you are far more righteous than I. I should have fulfilled this, and I didn't. You are more righteous than I. But nevertheless, through it, Tamar is an outsider. She's of a nation that's called the Hittites. And they're not part of Israel, and they're not part of Judaism. They were outsiders. And she has a somewhat less than pure entry into the family line. And yet God brings this into the whole picture and says this too is part of the lineage of Jesus, the anointed one. When we come to the next one, Rahab, it's a lot of fun things in here. Rahab, if you remember in Joshua, it's the 5th book of the Bible. And Israel has crossed out of the wilderness, 40 years wandering in the wilderness, 40 years of grumbling, complaining, 40 years of manna cooked every way that you could, banana bread and manicotti and all kinds of stuff. If only DY was here. And they come out of and into the promised land, and they come to the city of Jericho. And the city of Jericho is there, and it's a powerful city. Bruce has told me that they believe that Jericho in the Bible is the longest city, permanently resided in city in the world. And it goes back thousands and thousands of years of people having cities there. And it was a powerful city, and they come to take it down. Joshua is going to tear the city down. And Rahab is a prostitute in the city. There's 2 spies go into the city to check out how we're going to do this, how Israel will win. And she protects them. And she hides them. And when the soldiers come to her door, she says, show us the men that have come to you. And she says, they're not here, they left, they're gone. And she protects them. And when the soldiers leave, she says to the 2 men, remember me. Remember me when you've taken the city. She said, all of the city has heard about your God, the God of Israel. They have heard what he has done in Egypt, the great plagues that he did in Egypt and how he crushed that land. They've heard how he parted the Red Sea. They have heard how he's defeated his enemies, how he led you through the wilderness. And the whole city is shaking with fear. And when you come and you take this city, which you will, remember me. And the two spies said, we promise we will, on pain of death, that our lives for yours if we do not honor this. And they said, you get all your family together, and everybody that's in your house will be protected. And they said, do this, put a red cord out your window, and we will know that it's this house is the one that's to be protected. A red cord out your window. And that word for red cord is up there, or tikwat. Tikwat. And what's intriguing about it is it's used twice here in Joshua 2:18 and 2:21. The first one is where the spies say, hang the red cord out the window. And a couple verses later it says, so she did what they said and hung the red cord out the window. What's intriguing about this word, this simple little word, is that it's used about 120 times in the Bible. And never, aside from these two times, is it used or translated as a cord, as a rope. Every other time it is translated, tikwath, it is translated as hope. It's hope. Or to put it different ways, this is what the actual Hebrew dictionary says: expectation, hope, optimistic outlook, hope that is maintained and proved. If you translated the passage in Joshua 2:18 and 2:19 and say that she hung a cord out and translate it like you translate the word every other place it occurs, what it literally says is she hung her hope out the window. She hung her hope out the window. And it's a fun picture. And it's kind of funny to think how that it got to be that, but I guess the translators early said, well, she had to hang something out, and somehow it came to be cord. But it's a common word through the Bible. It's through the Psalms all over. It says, it talks about rest and do not be afraid, for the God of your hope, tikwath, the God of your hope will take care of you. You can shelter under his wings and have hope, Israel. One of the favorite passages of many in the Bible, to one that we turn often when times are hard or troubled, is this great word. For I know what I have planned for you, says the Lord. I have plans to prosper you, not to harm you. I have plans to give you a future filled with hope. Tikwath is the last word in that. Hope. Literally, God says, I'm going to give you a future with a red cord hanging out of it. A red cord hanging out of our lives. Hope. And it's an interesting picture, and it fits with Rahab. And what she did, she trusted God. She followed God. That Israel came, they did what everything expected, that the city was destroyed. They rescued Rahab. And in that few verses later after the battle, it says that Rahab lived with the people of Israel all of her days. And in the New Testament, in chapter 11 of Hebrews, where it has a long list of famous people who are godly and examples of faith, Rahab, the woman Rahab, is named among them as an example of what faith looks like. It's her. And granted, she has a dubious profession, a prostitute. But what she's noted for is her faith and for her love, for her trust in God. And it's one more name in this genealogy. She's not pure, she's not perfect, she's not holy. But who of us is? There's not a person in any church ever that is perfect and problem-free, sin-free, and without guilt. And that Rahab teaches us that even the most broken are pulled into the family line of Jesus. He welcomes the sinner, the broken, and the hurting. And he recognizes faith. Faith is a cleansing, purifying, holy thing. Goes on from there, Boaz, the father of Obed, by Ruth. Ruth was a woman, a good woman, a great woman from Moab. Now, the problem with Ruth is not her morals. She probably was quite moral. She might have been a little forward. It depends on how you translate one Hebrew word. She may not have been, but she is a remarkable young woman, tender and gracious and incredibly good to her mother-in-law. If you remember the story, her mother-in-law, a woman named Naomi, had 2 sons, her husband and 2 sons, and they all go to Moab to live because of a famine, and her husband dies, and both the boys die. And Naomi is left with nothing, and she says to her 2 daughters-in-law, "The Lord has left me destitute. I have nothing. He's abandoned me and rejected me. I have nothing. You 2 go home and go to your father's homes, because I have no sons to give you. Go home." And the one daughter-in-law did, but Ruth said, "No, I will never leave you. I will never leave you." And she says these beautiful lines. She says, "Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." And you see in this book of Ruth, one of the most beautiful stories in the whole Bible, 2 women, a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, whose lives become entwined around one another with the deepest of love and respect. The 2 of them, each of them, seeking everything they can do to bring good to the life of the other. And the fun story in the whole thing is how God is using it to do an incredible blessing to all of them. What looks so horrific, and was horrific for Naomi, God was nevertheless, he hadn't abandoned her. He was shaping and curving the time and lives to bring good into her life. So Ruth becomes married to Boaz, a good man, a very good man, and becomes and enters into the lineage of King David. But Ruth is from Moab. She's a very sweet girl, you get the impression, incredibly sweet, incredibly caring. There's nothing wrong with her in any way, but she's from Moab. And for the people of Israel, this is terrible. The people from Moab were evil and wrong. They were very bad. The very word Moab tells it all. In Hebrew, Moab means from father, from father. And it goes back to their beginning. In Genesis, when God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, he told Lot, "You can flee," and Lot's wife dies and the whole thing. Lot flees with his 2 daughters, ends up in a cave, living there in a cave. And the 2 daughters say, "There's not a real good dating life up here in the mountains, and Tinder is just not coming through while I'm in the cave. And why don't we do what all the world is doing? We need to get pregnant, and the only way it's going to happen is with father." And so they get him drunk, each one on a different night, and their whole lineage of the Moabite people from father comes from the incestuous relationships of the 2 daughters with the father. So even the very name, from father, is just disgusting to the people of Israel. And here Ruth, she's not evil, wicked, sinful, and in a sense any more than normal people are, but she's from Moab. But this genealogy says, look at how even the outsider is welcomed. The outsider is welcomed into the family line. And finally, the wife of Uriah, we have no idea how guilty she was. It's interesting, Matthew can't even name her. We know her by Bathsheba. And when she was bathing on the roof, King David saw her, went down, seduced her or raped her, never quite sure. And she became pregnant. And David had her husband, Uriah, killed in battle. And then he took her as his wife. He's confronted by Nathan the prophet, who says, in a nutshell, what you have done is very bad in the eyes of God. It is really bad. And Matthew, it's intriguing. He can't even, it seems, come to name her. He's just Uriah, the wife of Uriah. And whether it's fair to blame the wife of Uriah, Bathsheba, for what happened, whether she had a consensual role or was completely innocent, nobody knows. But in any case, you have another broken person or a broken situation. Certainly King David was broken. It's intriguing at the very beginning what we don't have, the very first line. We have none of the traditional patriarchs are there. The classic patriarchs of ancient Israel. You got Sarah, the wife of Abraham, Rebekah, the wife of Isaac. And you got the wives of Jacob. And the 4 are not named. Husbands are, but the 4 great wives are not. But it seems in this new Genesis that what Matthew is doing is creating a new matriarchal family, new matriarchs of the faith. Not perfect, from broken lives and broken worlds and messed up, swirling about cultures, from hatred and lack of care. And it's from this family line, from this tree, that the Messiah comes. And there's 3 things in closing that this genealogy teaches us. One is racial, and it teaches us how God includes the Gentiles. For most of us, that's really good news because we don't come from a Jewish line. We're Gentiles. And the early church wrestled with whether the Gentiles were meant to have this, meant to hear this. And early on, they decided that what God has done for them in Jesus is for all the nations of the world. And they went back to the promise of Abraham. And they said that through you, all the nations will be blessed. This is exactly what's happening. But the first thing to notice is that in this story, at the very beginning of the gospel, with just a long list of names of Father, Son, there are these 4 surprises. And the first lesson, the gospel lesson, good news lesson, it says is outsiders are welcome. Gentiles are welcome. Gentiles are included in the family line. Jesus didn't just come for sinners. He came through sinners. He didn't just take our sins on his shoulders at the cross. He took them when he went into the waters of baptism. He took them even at his birth, being part of our broken lives. He's not against us. He's for us. The second thing that we see is the moral, and that there's forgiveness of sins. That who knows what exactly any of these women or any of these men did. Some of the men are admirable, some are reprehensible. Even King David, it was really he, more than anyone else, the most scandalous seduction in the entire Bible. And yet through all of these broken people and sinful people, God does a work. And it testifies again that it's to the sinful and for the sinful he comes. Luther used to say we should embrace sin with both hands. He said we should sin boldly. And that doesn't mean go out and do whatever you want. Of course, it would never mean that, but it means admit that this is what we are. We're prone to wander, as the hymn says. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. We're so prone to take the scriptures and bend them and twist them to what we want them to say. We're so prone to cutting out passages we don't like and living and holding on to the ones we do. And that's what sin does. And that's us. It's all of us equally. It just manifests different in different lives, but it's all of us. And the great news, the gospel news of this story is that Jesus not only came for the sinful for us, he comes through our line. He identifies himself with us. And finally, there's the sovereignty of God, the profound sovereignty of God who's steering all of history. That whatever good or bad any of the people in this story did, whether male or female, whatever good or bad that they did, it did not stop God as he moved all of history to the birth of his son. And for this reason, we can have hope. That we can recognize that God's hung a red cord out of our window. That it's not his desire to destroy us, but the promise to save us. And that the story of Jesus, of God saving us in Jesus, is all wrapped up even in this long list of names. Everything that's spelled out in the rest of Matthew is hinted at in these words. The outsiders are welcome. The broken can be called in. That this is for the most unworthy. It's a gospel of good news, and we can have hope. We can truly have tiquat, hope, a string of hope, a thread of hope, because of the goodness of God.